few. The first is to be kind. The second is to be kind. And the third is to be kind. I've also seen these same words attributed, wrongly, to Mr. Rogers, who is the subject of not one, but 2 recent movies celebrating his remarkable career built on the virtue of kindness. Picture books for young readers about kindness are proliferating. Each kindness, finding kindness, a world of kindness. Perhaps because we live in a world that right now is so conspicuously unkind, kindness seems to be in. When we sing one of my favorite prayer songs, and I didn't call the number for that one, "Change my heart, O God." With every note I sing, I implore God to make my heart be more kind. When we share communion together, and I have a few extra moments to kneel at the altar rail, through tears I pray, God, help me be more kind. God, help me be more kind. Help me be more kind. It's interesting, though, that Jesus himself doesn't talk to his disciples very much about kindness. Paul does, as we just heard, calling for kindness as the glue that will bind together emerging communities of committed Christians. If you search for mentions of kindness in the Bible, Old Testament references abound as well, even though we tend to think of the Old Testament as focused on the sterner virtues, righteousness, justice, fidelity to one's covenants. But not only does Jesus not use the specific language of kindness, at least as his words are translated for us, sometimes he says things that aren't very kind, not only to the hypocritical scribes and Pharisees, but to his own followers. When I was in college, I had a wonderfully wise professor of religion named Mr. Dembo. When I was picking up the stuff from that file cabinet yesterday, I still have my Mr. Dembo notes from all those years ago. I could ask him any question whatsoever about my own religious doubts, and he'd invariably have a thought-provoking answer. So I told him once I didn't think it was very nice of Jesus to call people names like "ye brood of vipers." Mr. Dembo did not share my worries on this score. He said, "I call my wife that whenever she doesn't like the same movie I do." And this taught me as much about what's involved in trying to sustain a lifelong relationship with another human being as about Christian theology. Instead of talking about kindness, Jesus talked about something much more radical and more difficult. He talked about love. Loving our neighbors as ourselves. Loving even our enemies. Loving one another as he loved us. Rather than talking about kindness, he lived it, showing his kindness through healing the sick, the blind, the lame, welcoming little children into his lap, forgiving even those who crucified him. But this leads me to a puzzle in my own life, and maybe in your lives, as I think about the relationship between love and kindness. Because, sad but true, I find I'm less kind to the people I love most. I remember when Christopher was very little, he was with me in the philosophy department as the secretary there was giving me a welcoming tour of the building. He was dawdling on the stairs, and so I said to him, "Hurry up." The secretary thought I was talking to her, and she whirled around, shocked at such rudeness. But instantly she realized I wasn't talking to her, but to my own child. After all, one would never be so rude to someone other than a family member. A sobering thought. And the people I love most are less kind to me. It's all my sons can do to conceal their impatience with me, horrified by all the things I don't understand that are so transparently clear to them. My engineer son was beside himself when I tried tipping Maddie's sippy cup more steeply so she could get the last drops of milk out of it. "Mom, there's a straw in it. You can't get more milk out of a cup with a straw by tipping it." When I mildly protested that I hadn't realized that, this only made matters worse. "Just look at it. All you have to do is look at it." And of course, I was equally impatient with my own mother, who had a propensity propensity for trying to enlighten my sister and me on changing features of the world that were new only to her. I still remember the time she tried to tell us about this new kind of parking space that was set aside for the handicapped. Mother, those have been around for years. Why are we less kind to those we love best? Maybe it's because it's only in intimate relationships that we feel safe enough to express some of our negative emotions that we keep properly buttoned up in our interactions with others. Maybe it's because the faults and foibles of our loved ones bother us more, because they impact us more in our day-to-day lives. Maybe it's because our loved ones are the only ones who will still love us, even after we've called them ye brood of vipers. But it hurts me when my loved ones are unkind to me, and I know my frequent lapses into unkindness hurt them as well. Unkindness is contagious. I'm unkind to you, and you're unkind back. Unkindness escalates. I say harsh things to you, and then you say even harsher things to me. It's blatantly false that sticks and stones can break our bones, but words can never hurt us. Words hurt us most of all, leaving scars in our heart forever. So I want to be kinder. I need to be kinder. And in the year to come, I'm going to try to be kinder. But how? I had the intense pleasure of attending the wonderful Generations concert a couple of weeks ago, which closed with a song by David Friedman, arranged by Kirby Shaw. We can all be kind. Well, maybe we can, and maybe we can't. It's not enough simply to will ourselves to be kinder. I think we need to give some thought to how to do this. This reminds me that when Gregory was in first grade, his teacher gave the class an assignment where they had to provide their own second half for some saying unknown to them but familiar to adults. Their answers were delightfully hilarious. The pen is mightier than the pencil. Or my favorite, you can lead a horse to water, but how? How indeed. So how can we be more kind? When I think of my own resolve to be kinder, there are two things I think will help me most. The first is to create conditions for myself in which it's easier to be kind. For better or worse, I get unbearably stressed when my house isn't tidy. I don't feel stressed if your house isn't tidy. So if you invite me over, don't feel you have to clean up on my behalf. But if my own living space is disordered, I feel as if my whole life is in terrible disarray. I can't find the inner peace I need to respond with kindness to small irritations. Instead, each small irritation is just one more thing. I'm also more kind if I'm rested. If I go outside for a while for a walk with my dog or a friend or both. I'm more able to be kind if I'm not hungry. There's a reason why the word hangry was coined, to describe anger born of hunger. It's a gift to others to provide ourselves with the self-care we need to be able to care for others with patience and grace. The second, and even more important, is to think hard about what stories I tell myself about things that might lead me to be unkind. If I see your behavior as rude, belligerent, selfish, I'm more likely to respond in the same way. But I can often choose how to understand another person's behavior. I don't have to take everything personally. Often how people act toward me has nothing to do with me at all. My husband was always late to everything. Late as in very, very late. At one point I realized there were two ways I could interpret his chronic lateness. One was to think, people who are late are narcissists who prioritize anything they are doing over anything someone else is doing and value their own time vastly more than they value anybody else's time. The other way would be to think, people who are late just aren't very good at managing time. Time management is a talent and a skill some people simply lack. When I told myself the first story about my husband's lateness, I'd respond with anger. When I told myself the second story, I'd respond with rueful compassion, and even with benign amusement. So, if I want to be more kind, I can try to create the conditions in my home and in my heart that foster kindness. I can try to view other people's actions actions and motivations with the principle of charity, making my default stance to assume the best, not the worst. But someone might ask at this point, do we want to be more kind? I started this message by saying that the proliferation of kindness-themed picture books and Mr. Rogers movies shows that kindness is in. But I've also seen on social media, which can certainly be a zone of striking unkindness, a pushback against the aspiration to be kind. It usually arises in discussions on politics. You may have noticed that we're heading toward a presidential election in 2020. You may have seen occasional references to this and brief, fleeting mentions of dissatisfaction with our current president and current political realities. Here some people claim that we shouldn't be kind to people who are themselves moral monsters. Should we be kind to Hitler? Should we find a way to think the best of him? No. They say that people who are oppressed don't have to ask nicely for their rights to be respected. They don't have to be polite in asking those who are killing and torturing them to please stop. Here is where we can remember that most of the time, when Jesus talked about broods of vipers, he was addressing forces of real evil. To suggest that oppressed people complain nicely about their oppression has been denounced as tone policing. These people have a point, and yet I'm wary of the view that people, especially people I know and love, are evil simply because they think and vote differently from me. The satiric newspaper The Onion had an article years ago following some presidential election with the headline, "Americans stunned that 100 million people voted for the other guy." I've actually seen people on Facebook posting that if they had a friend or family member who voted for the other guy, they'd never speak to them again. They'd cut off all contact with them forever, because otherwise they'd just be condoning fascism. I don't reply to these posts, because nobody's mind has ever in the history of the world, or at least the history of social media, been changed in this way. But I want to respond. You could say this only because you don't, to your knowledge, have a friend or family member who voted for the other guy. If you did, I would hope your love for this person would outweigh your political outrage. And guess what? It simply isn't true that every single person who voted differently from me is evil. I know people who voted differently from me who are the most kind, generous, and loving, and knowledgeable and intelligent people imaginable. If you want to convince someone to think differently, my hunch is that kindness works better than hostility, and trying to understand the other person works better than insisting that they understand you. To quote the book of Proverbs, "A gentle answer turneth away wrath." To quote a non-biblical proverb, "You can catch more flies with honey than you can with vinegar." And remember the battle between the sun and the wind over which was strongest, shown by who could get a man to remove his coat? The wind's howling just made the man hold his coat ever closer. Only the sun's warming convinced him to take it off. Last week, I saw on Facebook a link to an exchange between a transgender activist, Rain Dove, and a mother accusing them of leaving her own child to question her gender identity. The mother began with hostility. "My child hates her body because of perverts like you." Dove responded with compassion. "For you to be reaching out to me shows you must care a lot about their health and well-being." As the exchange continued, the mother started to pour out her concern for her child, met by Dove's commendation to her for being the kind of mother whose child felt comfortable talking to her about difficult issues of gender identity. By the end of the online chat, the mother was writing, "Thank you very much for talking me through this without being angry. I just want her to lead a life she loves, that's all." And Dove replied, "I know you do. So do I." So God, in the coming year, change my heart to help me be more kind. Then maybe my kindness can change others' hearts to help them be more kind. After all, Jesus didn't tell the oppressive tax collector Zacchaeus that he was worthless scum. Instead, he welcomed Zacchaeus joyfully. As a result, Zacchaeus gave half of all his worldly goods to the poor and restored fourfold to all he had defrauded. In the coming year, may we all be more kind and more loving and more like true followers of Jesus.